Hello to everybody who's currently joining in. It's nice to see there's attendee names fill up. It's always a little bit worrying at the beginning of these things that you might be on your own for a bit. Hi, Sai. I'm just going to give it a minute or so for everybody who's attending to join. We are recording this, so we'll probably get folks dipping back into the recording to watch it at a later date. And who can blame them? It's a very hot day today. So hopefully you can hear me okay, and you can see my screen. If there's anything you need me to adjust, whether it's my volume or the pace in which I speak, whatever it might be, please make sure that you're popping that request in the chat, and the lovely team at She Can Code will pass that information on to me. And we are going to be using the Q&A function today. Sorry, not the chat, the Q&A function. So if you want to communicate with me at any point, then please pop that in the Q&A. And we will come to those questions. I will keep dipping into it to see if there's any questions that require me to stop mid-presentation. Yeah, so we'll be using the Q&A rather than the chat. That's super clear. Whilst we're waiting just for a few more seconds, feel free to say a hello in the Q&A. Tell me whereabouts you're dialing in from. Don't be shy. Good to feel that connection. Everybody's quiet today. Okay, so we'll get cracking, giving it a couple of minutes. So welcome, and again, thank you very much for taking the time to join this session. My name's Jo Major. I'll give you a little bit of an overview as to my background and what I'm all about in a second. But welcome, we're going to be looking at connecting diversity, equity and inclusion strategy into hiring and talent attraction. And this session is all about figuring out whether or not we are actually ready to welcome candidates and employees into our organisation that don't currently exist. Just going to check that Q&A. Somebody said dialing in from London, looking forward to the session. Oh, thank you so much. Calling in from South Africa, glad to be here. Brilliant, we're going global. I love it. Thanks for that, folks. Okay, so let's have a look a little bit about my background. Okay, so this is me. Please feel free to scan the QR code, which will get you through to my LinkedIn profile. I post loads of content on LinkedIn. I've always got something to say around ED&I, DE&I, whatever acronym you want to use, and the recruitment and hiring process and talent attraction. I'm very, very generous with my content. I do not play my cards close to my chest. I give out loads of free stuff on there, so please get connecting or following me. So this is me. I have 24 years in the talent and hiring space. I was actually a recruiter for the majority of that time. So I was recruiting and managing teams, worked for a whole range of different sectors and different disciplines. And hands up, I am my biggest case study. I never thought about diversity, equity and inclusion or any of the words that belong to the acronym when I was actually on desk. And my kind of journey into ED&I started when I moved into learning and development and I became a trainer. And I saw loads of opportunities to be able to weave ED&I strategy into the recruitment and hiring process. and noticed that there were many recruitment businesses and employers that were potentially missing a real opportunity to join the dots there. So this is me. Hopefully that gives you enough insight to be interested in what we're about to talk about, and also a little bit of credibility, so you know that I've got a rough idea of some of the stuff that I'm talking about. Okay, so hopefully that sounds all good. Drop me, if you can, drop me a quick one in the comments in the Q&A if that makes sense and you're up for the learning, ready to listen. Do that quickly, don't overthink it. Brilliant, thank you. It just makes me feel like I'm not here presenting on my own. Okay, so some of the stuff that we are going to cover. We're going to, first of all, look at what we mean when we talk about diversity, right? I'm going to have a really honest conversation with you folks. Hopefully I'll get some interaction about what we even mean when it comes to that singular word, diversity. And we're going to look at some of the data around the human experience, and that will all make sense when we do it. Why do I start off with this topic? Because we all need to be on the same page, right? You need to understand where I'm coming from, and I need to make sure that everybody understands the context to this conversation. I want to make sure that we center candidates in all of our conversation, right? We know there's loads of commercial gains to ED&I. Know about all the business benefits, hopefully. But sometimes I feel that we lose track of who we're actually talking about here when we talk about diversity and we talk about recruiting diverse candidates. And it's the human beings, it's marginalized candidates, it's people who are underrepresented, people who face barriers into recruitment or into work because of their identity, background and circumstance. So we're going to dive into that and hopefully going to present you with a bit of data that's give us a bit of a reality check on who we're showing up for. I'm going to explain my equity first approach, okay? So this is like my belief system around when, as organizations, we are ready to start hiring people that don't currently exist into our business. And then I'm going to give you 5 signs that demonstrate that you are ready to hire in, okay? You might think you're ready now, and that's great, but let's have a look at some of these signs that show your strategic readiness to make sure that the new people that you're bringing into your organization to create those high-performing teams are going to be welcomed, that have got access to resources, full equity at work, and can show up, thrive, and be themselves, right? And do the job that they've been brought in to do, okay? As I said, I'm super generous with content. So at the end, I'm going to give you some checklists. I love a checklist. I just think they're a really good visual for us to use as a little bit of a framework for when we're actually doing this. Again, it'll all make sense as we go through. So hopefully that's completely clear in what we're going to cover. Fingers crossed. Okay, thanks for all of you ones. I'm sure you'll get to this, but what are the main mistakes that you see in the language used when trying to work in line with equity and diversity? Really good question. I want to give it a decent answer. So what I'm going to do, so I don't go down a rabbit hole and I stick to the content, I'm going to come back to it. It's a very significant question. It's a question that I get asked all the time. I personally think, because people are scared to get the language right and the terminology right, sometimes we're a bit worried about even starting to have these conversations, and we really shouldn't be. Like, we all make mistakes, right? We can try, we can Google stuff, we all make mistakes, right? And it's about what we do when we realize we've said something we shouldn't have done, or it's not landed so great or as expected with somebody, but we'll come back to it. Stick a pin in it. Thank you. Okay, so let's start off with this word, diversity, okay? And I want you to be really honest, okay? When we talk about diversity, or when others talk about diversity, what are we really talking about? If we think of this in terms of identity and people, when we talk about diversity, what are the 2 top things that we think about when we talk about diversity in the context of a diverse candidate? Please, will you give me your thoughts in the Q&A? This is really important. I get a temperature check. Remember, There's no right or wrong. I just want to get your genuine feeling on what we mean when we talk about diversity. When organizations say we are looking for diverse talent, right? We are prioritizing diverse talent. What identity markers are we talking about? Have a guess. Anyone got any thoughts? Underrepresented backgrounds, yeah, absolutely. It's like gender and race. I have to agree, right? When we're usually with folks that haven't necessarily stepped into the training, and that's a lot of people, right? The go-to is women and people of color, right? Just to mention, the terminology that I use is terminology that is up to date in the ED&I space, okay? So women and people of color. Somebody's mentioned intersectionality, so everything should be considered. Yes, it should. But unfortunately, we're not all there yet. We're not all looking at this through multiple identity markers that make up one human being that are all subject to some form of discrimination, and looking at how those different levels of discrimination intersect with each other and, you know, and play out for that person. We're not there yet. But gender, race, abilities, sexual orientation. Somebody said for me, it's about encompassing race, age, sexual orientation, religion, disability, socioeconomic background, etc. Yeah, absolutely. So diversity is everybody, okay? Everybody is different to one another when it comes to their background, their circumstances, and their main identity markers. Some of those are protected by the Equality Act 2010, others are not, such as socioeconomic background. And I always start off with this, right? This is an identity marker, men. It is my belief that men don't always feel included in the conversation about DE&I, or whatever acronym we want to use, okay? There's something about the conversation publicly where I think some men don't feel that they can step into this, that they are somehow, there's so much noise about them, you know, kind of dominating or occupying positions of power, or organizations being, you know, full of white men. I'm not going to use the derogatory language around that because I don't agree with it. But you know, I start off with men because men can be marginalized, men can be underrepresented, men have a whole range of different identity markers other than being a man that can subject them to a barrier into a recruitment process, or a barrier into work, or be subject to discrimination and prejudice. Good to know your thoughts on that, if that resonates, okay? So let's have a look at some of these identity markers, okay? Men, LGBTQ+, faith, disabilities, race, ethnicity, menopause, chronic long-term illnesses, things we never ever talk about, pregnancy, housing situation, access to quality education, neurodiversity, mental health, ex-offenders or returning citizens, whatever language you want to use, class, single parents, CAS, people who've been through the care system, people with accents that are not necessarily from the local area. That can be regional, or it can be accents from people who have got English as a foreign language, lower social economic status appearances, trans plus identity, nationality or immigration status, and even these fundamentals like the sector that you worked in, your career path, the employer or the brand that you've worked for, the level of experience you've had, even how long you stayed in a particular position for. Women, carers, people who speak different languages, over 40s, under 25s, right? So a whole, and this isn't even an exhaustive list, right? There is data to back up that every single one of those identity markers, right, can be subject to a barrier, right? Or can be subject to discrimination or prejudice or bias, okay? So I guess the key message here is that, like, when we're thinking about like diversity and our recruitment efforts just focus on, we need more women, we need more people of color, I'm asking the question, is that true diversity? Is somebody just a woman? Is somebody just a person of color, right? Diversity is everywhere, and it's really, really important that we embrace that and we accept it. And we try to take this holistic approach to inclusive, accessible, and equitable hiring, rather than being absolutely laser focused on what we can see and having diversity quotas that just focus on one or two identity markers, because what we're really looking at here is millions and millions and millions of candidates, right? If we were to do the maths, this is probably over half of the UK working population. So over half of the UK working population at some stage will face a barrier into work, or their identity, background, and circumstance could have an impact on the outcome of their job application or their promotions process or the salary that they deserve. So give me a 1 in the Q&A if that resonates. There's another question here. I agree, Joe, but don't you feel like quotas and targets hinder progression? I think the distractors, anonymous attendee, I really think that they distract us. I think like kind of targets, but targets that make sense, targets that are not just, you know, we're going to hire more of that particular group. I think whenever you start to look at representation targets, you have to look at the systemic reasons why those people are not currently showing up within your organization. Otherwise, for me, it's just hiring for numbers. So I'm not a massive fan of them. I think my preference would be that we look at currently what the diversity and demographic of our current employees are, compare it to how they navigate and feel about working with our business. So we compare it to their answers in relation to inclusion. We put all the interventions in place. We figure out why this stuff is happening and why certain groups are overrepresented and why certain groups are underrepresented. And then we survey on a regular basis to see whether or not our work and interventions are actually working. For me, that would make more sense than actually going, we need our middle management upwards need to be representative of 50-50 women by 2026. That's kind of like, I think it's distracting. It becomes a numbers game, and it shouldn't be. And often this real laser focus pressuring recruitment agencies, pressuring hiring managers, pressuring internal recruitment teams to meet the quotas encourages the wrong types of behavior. And what I often find is people lose sight of the work and who we're trying to change things for, right? Who we're trying to level things up for, right? Who we're trying to create equality for, which is human beings, right? The human experience matters so much. Otherwise, it just becomes another strategy, right? It just becomes another initiative, another thing that doesn't work. And we are here to serve marginalized, underrepresented people. So we have to center everything around the human experience. So I thank you, 100% agree. Distracting is a good way to put it. Yeah. I could go into some real horror stories about quotas and targets and the impact that they have, but that's for another webinar. Right, okay, let me do a quick time check. All good. So the human experience and why it matters. I mentioned at the beginning of the session, this is something that I said we were going to cover. Okay. I normally present this in a different way. I normally gamify it because I find it goes in better. What I'm about to do now is present to you a whole range of different data points and statistics. Before anybody asks, I will give you the reference points as well, because everybody's really keen on where I get the data from. And I use data in a lot of my training because it brings everything to light, and we can't, some people argue with data, but when we go out there and talk to marginalized people and they tell us their truth and their lived experience, I'm not necessarily sure we should be in a position to question whether or not that happened. But what I'm about to present to you is ugly. right? It is hard hitting. It will make you feel a whole range of things. There may be identity markers that I'm mentioning here, right, that you belong to, or are identity markers of your children, of your partners, of your family, of people that you love and care about. So I always say, look, I'm going to put a trigger warning in because it's depressing, right? But it's really, really important that we understand where we are in the UK right now with some of this stuff, because some people feel that we're there, equalities for everybody. You know, we live in this meritocracy. You work hard, you put the effort in, you put in a shift, you can be anything you want. Right? Not the truth. Unfortunately, we don't live in a meritocracy, and who you are as a human being, who you were born, still impacts your career trajectory or your ability to be able to find work. Okay, so let me go through this data relatively swiftly. So 50% of UK adults have experienced or witnessed race, age, gender, or LGBTQ plus discrimination at work. So over half of your employees at some point will have experienced this. They might have seen it, or they might have witnessed it happen. 1 in 5 employers are less likely to hire a candidate with a disability. Okay, if you think about kind of like working population, we're looking at over 20% of people in the UK have a disability. There's also a lot of disabilities that aren't official for people, where they haven't registered themselves as having a disability. So there's a lot more people who regard themselves as having some form of disability. 1 in 5 employers are less likely to hire them. I would say that comes from a worrying, being scared, not knowing what we can do or how we can accommodate, and a whole stack of stereotyping loaded on top of that. I don't want to think that employers directly just don't want to hire people with disabilities. Disabled candidates are twice as likely to be unemployed as candidates without a disability. Okay, 50% of UK managers feel uncomfortable hiring a neurodivergent candidate, right? There's so much noise at the moment about neurodivergency, right? We're looking at between 15 or 20% of the UK working population who have had a diagnosis of being neurodivergent. I would say that that is only going to increase. A lot of people in adulthood are receiving a diagnosis. If we've got half of UK managers feeling uncomfortable about hiring, again, we can start to see how your identity, if you're neurodivergent, not only creates barriers for you in the recruitment process, but when it comes to bias and hiring decisions, that's impacting as well. 1 in 3 employers are less likely to hire a transgender candidate. 1 in 5 LGBTQ plus candidates are discriminated in the recruitment process because of their sexual orientation. Something like 1 in 7 candidates who regard themselves as being from the trans plus community have been physically assaulted whilst at work by a colleague or a customer or a client. Again, if we're doing LGBTQ plus work, we need to make sure that we think about trans inclusion as well. 1 in 3 candidates have experienced or witnessed racism at work. For those organisations who are, looking to hire in people who are Black, Asian, or from other ethnicity groups, when we're not really addressing the real deep-rooted systemic reasons why those communities are not showing up, is it a solution to just bring people into our business who don't currently exist? So thinking about this, what comes first, right? People of colour or anti-racism work and race equity work. Candidates who are Black, Asian, or from other ethnic groups have to send on average 60% more applications than their white counterparts to secure an interview. Okay. I never go through a training session with people who don't back me up on that. Many people give me examples of the fact that they changed their name to an Anglo-sounding name and received more yeses and actually got accepted for roles that they'd previously been rejected for in recruitment processes. 1 in 3 candidates who are Black, Asian, or from ethnicity groups feel that recruitment agencies will treat them fairly. So again, want to make sure that if we are using recruitment businesses, they are doing everything they can to build trust with that community, with those communities. 70% of candidates say that age discrimination is commonplace in the workplace. I would comfortably argue that it's the most common form of discrimination in recruitment. I meet so many people that I train that are, that can give me 25 examples of this happening on a weekly basis, and also people at the receiving end of it. 1 in 3 candidates feel discriminated against because of their class during their job search. 61% of employers reject candidates with the right skills and experience for jobs simply because they don't have a degree. Remember that only a third of the population in the UK have the resources to be able to go to university. And if we start to narrow that down into our red brick, Oxford, Cambridge style, or our first classifications, our pool gets narrower and narrower, and we can directly link people's identity to whether or not they've got access to that level of education. So if you still put in you need a degree in your adverts, you're passionate about D&I, you've got to reframe that and rethink it. 3 out of 4 UK companies are still paying men more than women on average. 390,000 new mothers out of a 580,000 pool experience pregnancy or maternity discrimination at work. Motherhood penalty, 7% pay gap between mothers and non-mothers, 21% pay gap between women and childless men, and that is on top of the gender pay gap, that is on top of the ethnicity pay gap, and that is on top of the disability pay gap. So if you're looking at this through an intersectional perspective, we start to see all these multiple layers of pay discrimination adding up for individual candidates. This is an interesting one. If you're an organisation that is offering flexible and hybrid working, you are acknowledging the fact that 27% of unpaid care work is still completed globally by women, completing on average 4.5 hours a day, 3 times more than a man's average of 1.5 hours a day. 85% of women leave full-time employment within 3 years of having a baby because they cannot balance full-time work without flexibility, without hybrid working, without part-time opportunities or job share, with running the home, taking responsibility for unpaid care work, potentially looking after parents and looking after the kids, okay? And we wonder why we've got such staggering levels of underrepresentation of women in senior leadership, right? I think something like 80% of women under the age of 40 will have a child, right? So again, we start to see those connections, right, between what our environment is providing, our benefits, our policies, and the direct link to leveling the playing field and stopping this happen. Pop me like just some one word description of how this data makes you feel. Just a one word description. Sad. Absolutely. Utterly depressing. Sad, shocked, utterly shocked, disappointed. Yeah. I mean, I could do a whole hour talking about this data. This is a snapshot, right? And I do it for impact, right? Because I want people who are interested in this stuff to really understand what's playing out. And when we go, we want more women. We're going to commit to a 50% shortlist of women on the CVs that are sent to us. It's just scratching the surface. It's just like, what are we actually doing to provide equity in our organisation? What are we doing to address this stuff? Because even though it's not happening in our businesses necessarily, it could be happening for the people that we're trying to attract, or it could have happened. Okay, talk about imposter syndrome, right? Imposter syndrome is not something we're born with, it develops, right? That lack of belief in ourselves. This is the stuff that's contributing to it. Thank you, folks. I appreciate you being open and honest with me about how you feel in that moment. Okay, so remembering there is a human experience behind every diversity quota, goal, and objective. And I know that those that have shown up today, you've got to care about this stuff. And if you want to use that data just to put in front of people, just to try and win their hearts and minds, absolutely feel free. Because, you know, if we're not censoring those people, then I'm not sure we're ever going to really turn the dial on this stuff. We could make the mistake of hiring ourselves out of our diversity issues, right? So this is another Joe Major concept, right? Sometimes I have these things, these visions in my head, these ways of explaining things, because I'm so passionate about getting people to see things from a slightly different perspective. And, you know, if you're from a business where you've realized that you're not very diverse, and for various reasons, whether it's your investors, whether it's your shareholders, whether it's your senior leadership team, whether or not it's your clients or your customers that are holding you accountable for representation, right? You may have taken this approach. You may have just thought, right, we're under so much pressure here. We just need to instruct our agencies or our internal recruiters to go out and hire people who don't exist within our business, right? We need to hire ourselves out of our diversity issues, right? Do I dare even ask you in the Q&A if that feels too familiar? I don't expect you to put it in there, unless you're anonymous, by the way, right? I'm sure that maybe, Si, you might have experienced this as somebody who's a supplier, you know, where sometimes we get asked, you know, to fulfill quotas, but it's not the solution, right? Think about if we've never done any work, right, to understand why people are underrepresented, if we've never done any work to understand why certain marginalized groups are just not applying to our jobs, if we don't really look at our policies and our working environment and our benefits package and all of this great stuff that affects the way that people navigate our business and their careers within our organization, or things like behavior, like if we have this underlying issue with sexism within our organization, or even worse, racism or misogyny or ableism or transphobia, right? We need to figure out whether or not that stuff's going on before we start to focus on bringing people in. Because let's think for a moment what happens to somebody where we've promised this amazing stuff in our employee value proposition, but the reality is very different. You know, speak to anybody who has been the first or the only one to go onto a team where their identity doesn't feel like it matches, where they don't see themselves. Talk to those people about their experience when they're joining organizations who haven't done the work, right? They're in, they're out, and there's a whole stack of damage in between when it comes to their careers and how they feel and what goes down during that time. So this is my equity first hiring process. This is where we forget about hiring in and we approach this as building blocks, okay? Like the hierarchy. So we need to start with equity. First and foremost, so first things first, I would always do a really robust survey that looks at identity and compares it to inclusion. I'm going to mention it to you. I'm going to give you an example of it in a minute. Okay, so we want to know, like, what are our people? Who are our people? What do they want from our business? What's missing? What are we doing really well? What can we do more of? What do we need to stop doing? Okay. Then we start with this equity piece, which is the absolute bedrock of any diversity and inclusion strategy. If we don't provide this, right, we're never going to see an impact of our when it comes to our interventions, okay? So some examples of our equity foundations can be found in our policies, in our working environment, and in our benefits. So things like leadership training, education and training, anti-bias work, anti-discrimination work, anti-racism work. Fair and inclusive hiring policies is a brilliant example of equity in a recruitment process. Commitment to salary equality, you know, if you're really proud of your lack of gender pay gap, you know, that is an example of equity. The fact that everybody receives fair and equal pay. Hybrid and flexible working, one of the most important significant areas of equity. Things like accessible tech, accessible workplaces, language and banter policies, neurodiversity training, all of those things are examples of equity. And I'm going to give you some checklists so you can see some of those in action. So it's about policies, working environment, and benefits. And I don't mean things like, you know, 25 days holiday and pension scheme and whatnot. I mean, inclusive benefits that directly level the playing field, like family building stuff, family friendly policies as examples. What happens when we create equity is it results in equality. Okay, so all of that great work means that every single employee within our business should now be well on the way to having fair and equal treatment and have the same opportunities to work, learn, and develop regardless of their identity, background, and circumstances. Equality doesn't just happen because we don't break the rules, right? Equality happens because of our equity efforts. Once we've got that, we get inclusion, right? Inclusion is about how we make people feel, right? Inclusion is people, your employees feeling safe, valued, and respected, and empowered to show up to work every day as themselves. Okay, they're seen, they're heard, and they can contribute fully. Everybody's ideas are, there's a space for everybody's ideas. Okay, you've heard of that thing, you can bring yourself to work. You cannot bring yourself full self to work unless you've got equity and equality. Very, very dangerous for people to bring the full selves to work. So inclusion is something that we make happen. It's the way that people feel. Then we get the magic stuff, the belonging, right? We all know what happens, you know, when we belong to an organization. Reflect back on what it felt like when you felt you truly belonged to an employer, right? Great stuff happens. We see, you know, mental health improvement. We see sickness drop. We see creativity increase. There's data behind all of this stuff. We see better ideas. We see, you know, less risk to an organization. We retain people, our biggest costs. So recruitment and retention levels, you know, are where they should be. And, you know, people feel great in our business, and that gives us so much confidence and content for our employee value proposition to then go out there and attract people who are not currently represented in our organization. That is not an overnight thing, right? I make it sound really easy, but you might be on a journey. It might take you between 6 to 12 months. Again, this is about being really clear on what you want to achieve, where you're at now, what your goals are, and knowing what the interventions are to get there. And thinking about how do you communicate to that candidates in a really authentic, truthful way, so they know just what to expect within your organization. Put me a 1 in the Q&A if that is a useful concept for you to think about. Very, thank you, loving that. Gives me a little bit of reassurance, right? Normally I'd be taking myself off camera and saying, do you get it? Thank you. And you'll get, you know, if you want, and in my resource hub, which I'll give you a link to, there's a copy of that. So if you need that to be able to take within your business and have conversations, feel free. That's why I created it. Okay, so all of that stuff, probably your heads are spinning a little bit. What is she talking about? How do we know when we are ready to hire in underrepresented people? Okay, there's no magic solution. There's no exhaustive list, right? There's just a few things that I would recommend that you had in place before we start to hire people in. Okay, so I've numbered these 1 to 5, and I'll go through them super quick so we can have a bit of a Q&A at the end. So how do we know when we are ready to hire in underrepresented people? Notice I say underrepresented rather than diverse. I'm not a fan of describing people as diverse. Let's talk about what the situation is. They're underrepresented, far more powerful when a word means something. Sign number 1, you understand the data and how your people experience your business, right? I know that Kat Wildman from Powered by Diversity has previously done a session, so you should hopefully have access to it. I cannot recommend this tool enough, and I do not get paid to say that. It is a beautiful surveying tool, financially accessible, and will give you a really, really honest, under the bonnet viewpoint of your organization and where you are. And the best thing is it's got so much insight into what you can do about it packed into it. It's really, really good when you're like building out your employee value propositions, because if you've got some really good positive data, You can use that data in your marketing and your comms of your jobs. You know, if 99.9% of your employees feel included in your organization, if 99.9% of people within your business feel like they receive a fair salary, like promotions are accessible to them, like they're treated fairly and respected, that would be all over my career site, because that's evidence, right? That's your receipts. Very, very important. If we start doing the work before we understand this stuff, we're setting ourselves up for a massive challenge, because it might be that externally we're making all this noise about DE&I, but our people don't feel the same way, or they don't experience it. So get your data in order, understand how people feel about your business in relation to their identity. That's the critical bit. Sign number 2, everyone understand there's a human behind each diversity quota. This is the hard bit, okay? There's a focus on positive action, right? Positive discrimination is when we bring people into our business or directly headhunt them purely because of their identity. Their identity is priority, their skills and experience come secondary, okay? We don't want to be doing that because it's against the law. Diversity and inclusion isn't about choosing one group over another, right? It's not about lowering the bar. It's about opening the gate wider, right? So we can access more talent and make proper decisions. So make sure that everybody understands the human and nobody is motivated by ticking boxes, right? And treating humans as commodities. We don't want to do any of that. This is hopefully you'll have all seen this. Not everybody has, right? This is the Government Equalities Office guidance on positive action, the Equality Act and positive action and what you need to know. And it gives loads of examples around positive action. And that's what we should be doing. We shouldn't be asking our recruiters to go and headhunt women. We shouldn't be asking our recruiters to go and headhunt Black people, right? We should be thinking about our recruitment marketing strategies, looking at our business and looking at targeted strategies and providing equity in the recruitment process, looking at our policies, looking at our benefits, looking at our EVP, and using that to attract talent. So skills and experience priority, right? With the deeper work, we should eventually build out the diversity, representation of our talent pools. Just takes a bit longer. Not everybody wants to, you know, they're not in it for the long game. And this is a long game. So check that link out. Check that guide out if you can. Sign 3, your leaders understand that DE&I is behavior, ethics and culture, and you've seen a shift in thinking. This is probably one of the biggest challenges that I see from the people that I train, right? We've got different levels that really get this stuff, but the leadership team are not into it, right? You've got to do the work, get them in a room, bring somebody in to do the work, get them, win the hearts and minds, get them to see the human benefits, get them to see the commercial benefits, get them to step into the education. You are going to need a stack of resources. There's going to be a load of change. You're going to need some money for it, right? If the leaders are not feeling it, it's so difficult. I see so many incredible ED&I people lose their jobs because they were brought in and the leadership team weren't feeling it. Okay, I'll be really quick because I know there's a couple of questions. Sign 4, you feel confident that you are on a journey to create true inclusion, equity and equality for your employees. And most importantly, you know how to communicate it, right? Every single hiring manager and recruiter in your business can talk about this journey that you're on, okay? If asked by a candidate. And should we even be waiting to be asked? Should we just go, did you look at our ED&I commitments on our website? Did you see the things that we've done already? Did you see the stuff that we've got planned? How do you feel about that? I promise you that will be the first time they've ever been asked as a candidate. And if we look at all the data, right, especially with Gen Z and millennials, we're looking at figures between 70 and 80% of those talent pools that care about this stuff, but they've never ever been given an opportunity to ask about it at interviews. So let's make sure that we feel confident that we're on a journey. It's a long journey ahead. We might not be anywhere near complete, but at least we're doing something properly, right? Number 5, you train your hiring managers in inclusive, accessible and equitable recruitment, right? I would say that, right? I'm a trainer. This is what I do for a living. But how can we expect our hiring managers and recruiters to do things slightly differently if we've never given the skills and tools to do that, right? If we want a different outcome to what we've always attracted and hired, we need a different approach, okay? People don't just do things differently because you send them an email. They need proper training. They really need to understand the reason why. I have many people coming into the funnel who just aren't bought into this, and it's extra work and it feels like really, really complex stuff. As soon as they've been through training, they're like, I get it. I see how this benefits me as an individual. I see the commercial benefits of that. I get the human side of it. And then a bonus sign, and this looks like it's full of really big words. Right, this is the critical bit, right? We've moved away from talking about diversity, and then we understand that what our work involves is actually attracting underrepresented, under-recognized, historically excluded, and systemically marginalized candidates, right? We recognize that we've gone beyond the word diverse. We understand what these people want to see from you as hiring managers and recruiters and businesses and your hiring processes, right? These words are really, really powerful, because when we start to think about people who are historically excluded or systemically marginalized from employment, from healthcare, from finance, from access to resources, from housing, from education, we start to see there's a lot more grassroots stuff to this. And just because we put our advert through a gender decoder, right, or we use a Shutterstock image of a marginalized person, it's not going to change anything for our business or for the people working with it or the potential future candidates. And then quickly, hope that was useful. Drop me a 1 if it makes sense. Drop me a, I don't know, drop me a 2 if it's going completely over your head and you don't get it. I need to know how it's landing. So I promised you at the beginning, I'd give you some examples. I'd give you some checklists. Anybody who knows me or has been on a training, you know I absolutely love a checklist. I just think it really shows that tangible stuff that I'm actually talking about. And I like theory. I do love a bit of theory, but I absolutely love being shown what I need to do. And I think sometimes that's a missing part of what we do. Show me what I need to do. So this is just an example. You know, I mentioned inclusive benefits. Now, inclusive benefits can create equity, right? They make your life as an employee much easier. They level the playing field a lot of the time. And they also play a massive role in talent attraction, right? Like sometimes you can really dissect, like, right, so we've got this community that's missing from our leadership team. What is it that we've got on offer when it comes to benefits that those people are going to really benefit from, that are going to give full equity and equality to those folks? Let's center that at the top of our adverts. Let's make sure that our recruiters are highlighting that stuff when they're headhunting candidates. I'm working with a client who has a best-in-class flexible and hybrid working policy. They've seen a direct impact on the retention of women since they implemented it 2 years ago. I want to know that stuff, right? As a woman, because, you know, that stuff really matters to me. So think about how you understand your benefits, whether or not you need to do some work around them, and ultimately, how do you use them? So benefits that support people, policies that protect them, right? This is a lot, but I'm not going to go through all of them, right? Policies, people go, oh gosh, it's more than policy. Policies protect people, right? Policies are integral. They go beyond an equal opportunities document, okay? This just gives you an idea of the extensive policies. This is not like, you know, there's no end game to this, right? You can go on and on. And this is just a bit of a checklist to whether or not you're on your journey, whether or not you've actually got an authentic DE&I strategy. And you can go through that and you can be like, yeah, we've got quite a bit on here. How are we communicating that? Do our candidates know about this stuff? Are we talking to our agencies about it enough? Is it on our careers page? Have we embedded it into our employee value proposition? Is it showing up on our social media, right? Or opposite, it highlights a few bits that we probably need to focus on that. That's maybe a missing element we haven't done, right? I'm not saying you have to do all of this stuff, but at least you've got an idea as to, these are the 10 things that we've got, or the 5 things that we've got. These are the things we want to prioritize over the next couple of years. I'd far rather see that on your website than just some kind of like wishy-washy commitment about how passionate you are about ED&I, because passion never solved anything, did it? Action did, changing things does. Further reading, that top book, Sheree Atchison, The Man in More, Why DE&I Doesn't Happen, one of the best books I've ever read. Absolute foundational learning, brilliant, brilliant book. If you're in the tech space, Sheree, of course, a lot of you are in the tech space. Brilliant, brilliant book, loads of examples, case studies, global overview, absolutely love it. So hopefully that was useful. I've got some questions that have come in. Scan that QR code, you get access to my free resource hub. All those checklists are in my resource hub. The triangle, the pyramid, the equity first approach is in there, plus a stack of other stuff that you can get to grips with. So I'm going to come to the questions. Pop me a 1 if, yeah, somebody said a checklist. Join that hub, type in the top, benefits. There's a search button, anything I've mentioned, type it in there, brings it up. And you can print it off as a PDF. So pop me a 1 in the Q&A if you've got something useful out of this session. I mean, I look at the questions. What role do you think employees can play in holding companies accountable to DE&I? That's a really, really good question. I mean, I think employee activism is on the rise, right? I think that as soon as we, there's a little bit of a lull happening at the moment, right? There's a loads of like, people are, because of the cost of living, because, finding a job has become so blooming difficult, and, and there's less money around and less opportunities about. I think people will make decisions on their feet when we start that upward trajectory and get back to business as usual. I honestly think that employee resource groups are a great idea. I think employee resource groups are not just there to do the colouring in and arrange all the events and whatnot. They are there to hold the business accountable for its commitments. I mean, we've seen when employee activism takes a really, really, strong approach. We see we've got the Barbicans, we've got the Brew Dogs, just a couple of ideas, just a couple of things off the top of my head where people were very, very vocal about their lived experience. I think employees should hold their organisations accountable, but unfortunately, sometimes people are just, they're not empowered to do so, especially marginalised people. That's where allyship comes in. People who maybe are from majority groups, people who are perhaps not subject to prejudice, discrimination or barriers, they should be the ones that are, maybe not, calling people in, not calling people out. So yeah, speaking about leadership, do you think diversity has to come from the top down, or can change come from the bottom up? I would love to say that change can come from the bottom up, but in my experience, it can't. I think it has got to come. Unfortunately, this is one of the biggest challenges. If we think about the demographic, of people in leadership roles, if we think about the generation, there's a piece as well in my hub, an article about generational attitudes towards diversity and inclusion. Plays a big part. I'm not stereotyping, but the facts are there, the research has been done, and it can do. It's not, it's not fact. There's always things that go beyond the grain, but I think that it just has to. We've got to really tap in. We've got to get in front of our leadership team and figure out what's going to interest them. What are their pain points? Because I promise you, every single commercial, corporate pain point can be solved with an element of ED&I strategy. Like, we keep making products that aren't landing well. Okay, who's around the design table, right? Our profits are down. Okay, we know that profits go up when we've got more diversity in. We're not getting. There isn't anything, I don't think, from a corporate perspective that cannot be tackled by diversity, inclusion, culture, belonging, equality, and all of that stuff. That's why we've got work to do to incentivize those people at the top. Although I am getting quite a few leaders come to me that have something's happened from their lived experience, something's changed for them. It usually stems from where something's happened with one of their kids or their partner, or perhaps they're becoming really, really aware that if they applied for a job in their business, perhaps they wouldn't get it because they've developed such a cookie cutter approach to candidate profiles. Great conversation. I feel like a lot of these conversations simply comes down to trust, especially in terms of working mums, flexible working. There's a lot of mistruths that are kicking around. Like at the moment, everything that goes wrong in the world is blamed on flexible working without any data. If we trust in our employees, they feel safer, and in turn, culture becomes more inclusive. Yeah, absolutely. My thoughts are there is a lot of people who have faced discrimination and prejudice who do not have trust. And it's like it's trauma. It's you know, if we think about, you know, when we were subject to even things like bullying at school, right? If you've never been marginalized before or discriminated against, you know, a lot of us have been bullied, right? That shows up throughout our life, right? So, you know, work needs to be done. We need to absolutely foster like this trust piece. The more that we make people feel safer and included and belonging, the more that we get out of them. But it, you know, it is, are we making the diversity question too complicated? I think like some people may feel we just need to build trust, but actually, you know, if you're on the receiving end of bullying, harassment, discrimination, and prejudice, you know, the work needs to be done to get rid of it. It might be that you've got a wonderful relationship with your employer and it's really, really lovely. And then like 10 months down the right line, you find out that your male counterpart's getting paid 10K more than you. You know, so I don't think, that data is not due to a lack of trust. That data is down to society, systemic reasons, discrimination across all different levels. If you're still leading DE&I, I feel like you're losing. If you're still leading DE&I, I should feel like you're losing. What have you seen folks do to bring them back on track? This is a very, very good question, right? DE&I is not dead. Okay, what we are seeing is a reduction in interest of initiatives because we don't see a return on investment a lot of the time on initiatives. Okay, we're seeing, it's my belief that we're seeing diversity and inclusion take its usual position. I was going out to law firms and banks and hedge funds in 2016, 2017, and they were talking to me about, as you know, from a recruiter perspective, what are you doing around representation and diversity? But I think because of social events that have happened globally, since the pandemic, I think there's been this knee-jerk reaction for organizations to just be doing something. And it's usually something that hasn't been thought through with little strategic thought behind it or any real organizational change invested in it. And it's like, oh, you know, those webinars that we did, or, you know, that like, you know, that group that we sponsored, we've not seen a return on our investment. Of course you haven't, because it's an initiative based, it's an initiative based activity. I think we are, senior leadership team will always lose interest when they can't see a return on their investment, right? So this is why it's always important to get the data so you can see whether or not the things that you are doing are making a difference to your talent funnel, to your who's sticky, who's staying in your interview process, and who's getting hired. And again, like I said, looking at where you're at from a diversity and inclusion perspective from your survey, and seeing after you've done your strategic work whether or not it's making a difference on things like headcount, right? Things like whether or not people stay within your organization, etc. So again, economic issues, right? If you do your pestle analysis, right, I guarantee you can connect ED&I into every level of your pestle analysis. So it's just about strategy. It's like not having a conversation around ED&I as if it was a CSR activity. It's about bringing in ED&I as a strategic, what's the word? Strategic element, working practice, whatever it might be. I've not got the right word, I can't find it. Talking generational, do you think that DE&I will get easier as different generations enter the workforce? That is a hard yes, okay? Our Gen Zers are more socially aware than ever. And I think regardless of what the mainstream media, you know, kind of feeds us, there are still, you know, we've never had a more diverse generation. You know, Gen Z and the alphas that come after, even from a race and ethnicity perspective, have never been so diverse in the UK and the States. You know, we're seeing more and more things like, you know, people exploring the gender identity, the sexual identity. And I think that, you know, they're kind of like their tolerance levels and what they expect. I'm putting it on their shoulders to change the world. I'm sure they won't appreciate it, but yeah, I definitely think that, you know, we'll see things definitely get easier. So hopefully that was useful for everybody. I'm just really conscious we're on the hour. I appreciate the questions. If I haven't answered all of them, then Catherine, if you could possibly pop them on email and I will answer them on email. But hope this was useful. Much appreciated for the interaction, and I will hopefully hear from you soon. If you've got any questions at all, get joined in the hub. Take care, everybody. Thank you.